Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks very much for being here for this session on the mind of the leader, what makes them tick. The introductions of the panelists here have already been done. Two of them have flown in, one late last night and one early this morning. So they've already hit the gym, they've gone swimming and all of that. So those are signs of true leadership qualities as well, to try and get yourself refreshed before you actually come here and speak about leadership. Let me start by actually talking about how I see this discussion and how I see this debate and this issue. I was speaking a short while ago to somebody outside, and I said, to me, leadership is a little bit like love. It's hard to define. It's not an exact science. It's constantly evolving. It's always relative, and somebody always has the upper hand. So to me, leadership is a little bit like our discussions that we have on love. Modern day leadership is changed. We're now talking about transformational leadership. When in doubt, always quote your boss, because he pays your salary check, so hopefully he knows a little better than you. So I'm going to quote my boss, and he's heading one of India's largest television networks at this point in time, media networks, and one of the fastest growing networks. And he says that leadership today means being firm, means being accessible, being unyieldingly flexible, but stubbornly reasonable. To my mind, clearly defines the characteristics of true leadership and of a true leader today. I'm not going to take too much of your time because we're going to do that in the question of answer. So we're going to kickstart all of this. Our first speaker this afternoon, Stephen J. Roylder, Chief Operating Officer at Accenture. Stephen.
Thank you, Shireen. First of all, I want to say it's an honor to join you for this leadership forum. NASSCOM has clearly made a significant contribution to the growth of the IT industry in India. And I've had the pleasure of visiting India a number of times in the past couple of years. And time after time, I'm impressed by the amazing growth and the spectacular range of work being done here in the country. But the biggest standout for me is always the talent, the experience, and the warmth of the people. Accenture is very committed to India. We began operations here in 1987. We set up our first delivery center right here in Mumbai in 2001. We now have more than 27,000 people working in our offices across India, and it'll be 35,000 by the end of the year. We're real proud of the work that we do and our teams are doing to help our clients become high-performing businesses. So now I'm a real believer in gut reactions. And so before I checked into our research on this topic about the mind of the leader, I sat down to gather my own thoughts and qualities around the qualities that make a good leader. Two concepts came to mind immediately. Number one, to be a great leader requires authenticity. Secondly, the best leaders are really sensitive to the impact that they have on others. First, let's talk about authenticity. I think to be a great leader, you've got to have the courage always to be authentic. If you look up the definition of authentic, you'll find synonyms like genuine, dependable, real, true. And from my own experience, being authentic is a key to establishing trust. When your actions are consistent with your words, when your behaviors are consistent, then trust is much easier to achieve as an outcome. The leaders that I've been most motivated by in my own life were people that I trusted, even when their criticism was harsh or their ideas were very different from my own. My trust in them was built on their consistent actions, which showed their honesty and integrity. We are, after all, the sum of our actions. And I learned this at an early age from a most reliable source, my mother, who used to say, let your actions define what people say about you, and not vice versa. Let your actions define what people say about you, not vice versa. Our actions as leaders say a lot about our level of integrity. I think integrity can sometimes be an amorphous thing out there that is tough to define, but people piece it together. They piece it together in terms of how you listen and how you act and the decisions that you make and the conclusions you draw. They see it in your willingness to examine your own performance, while you also encourage them to examine their own. Actually, this idea of taking a hard look at your own performance brings a second thought, which is to be a great leader, you really have to be sensitive to the impact that you have on others. I learned this valuable lesson about 10 years ago during one of those exercises in humility that I mentioned earlier, which required me to take a hard look at my own performance. I'd just taken on the leadership responsibility of one of Accenture's business units. And about 2 weeks into the job, the head of HR came to me and she said, "Steve, you're an incredibly ineffective leader." I said, "Okay, well, you've got my attention." She said, "Look, I'm going to give you some very direct feedback in terms of your style and how you interact with people." And here's what she said. She said, "You've got to remember that the higher up you get in this organization, the more visible every single one of your actions is to our people. People are looking at how you walk, how you talk, and how you think. You're in a fishbowl now, and you have to remember that because even your tone of voice comes across in a certain way, it can impact people." And she was right. Through all of our actions, details as small as the tone of your voice, people will assume we're angry, pleased, or disappointed. As leaders, we must be really sensitive to that. We send out passion that may be unintentionally perceived as anger. And what we send out as frustration with circumstances may be unintentionally perceived as disappointment in someone's performance. So becoming more aware of this made a powerful difference for me. And this advice, while tough to hear, really helps sensitize me to what others are thinking when I talk to them. After thinking about my own interpretation, then, of the mind of a leader, I wondered how my ideas would stack up against the views coming out from Accenture's global research. So I reached out to the executive director of Accenture's Institute for High Performance Businesses to see what our very latest thinking is on the topic of leadership. The research actually lined up fairly consistent with my own personal views. Accenture's most recent research about the minds of leaders shows that 3 qualities distinguish truly outstanding leaders from the rest. First, we found that great leaders are voracious learners. They're aware that being a successful leader is a career-long journey, not just a one-time learned skill. And they're willing to put in the effort to continually improve. Great leaders are able to mine insights out of challenging life and professional experiences, and then apply those insights to improve their own performance and the performance of others. And great leaders are consistently open to new ideas and adapt more quickly to let go of old ways of doing things when a better way comes along. Second, the research showed that the best leaders are engaging. They're interactive leaders who can both enlist support and command action. This requires them to be both good teachers and good listeners. Whether using humor, passion, or their own unique personal style, great leaders are able to engage people in a way that builds a shared vision and mobilizes the best people to act on that vision. The third common quality we found amongst great leaders is integrity. The most successful leaders know what they stand for, and they have the courage of their convictions. Through a process of self-knowledge, including some of that humility and self-improvement I mentioned earlier, great leaders have developed a core identity and a spine that remains strong even when the circumstances demand that they adapt. They've got clear values and a voice that remains constant even as they operate in the most stressful and challenging circumstances. So as we talk more today about the mind of a leader and what makes them tick, I hope you'll consider these common qualities of superior leaders. I'd also ask that you keep in mind the importance of authenticity and being sensitive to how you impact others. To me, it all comes down to being authentic, authentic as you interact with people, authentic in your views, authentic as you continually work towards self-improvement. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to the rest of the discussion.
Steve, thanks very much. I hope my tone of voice is fine. There's no frustration towards you, no anger. All right, a couple of important points that Steve's actually talked about, and you sound very, very different. I remember Business Week had done an article about 20 years ago which talked about highly skilled barbarians, and these were the undergraduates and the graduates that were coming out of MBA programs, and talked about highly skilled barbarians, and how different, Steve, you actually sound. You're talking about sensitivity and authenticity over here. We'll discuss all of those things and the crisis of leadership in just a bit, but let me hand it over now to Patrick Snowball, Group Executive Director at Aviva.